My name is Emma Blake, and I'm 34. 3 years ago, my family cut me off completely when I lost my job and asked for help. Last Sunday morning, I was enjoying a quiet cup of coffee on the back porch of the house I bought by myself when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there they were, my entire family standing on my front steps with luggage. After 3 years of silence, my brother Sean looked past me into my home and said, "You don't even have a family to worry about? We'll take the rooms." What I said next reminded them that the woman they abandoned no longer existed. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground against family who tried to walk back into your life like nothing happened, don't forget to subscribe. Stick around, because what followed that knock on my door? It changed everything. Okay, let me tell you. 3 years ago, my life was a whole different story. I was running the HR show at this mid-sized retail company, living in my cozy little one-bedroom apartment right in the heart of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was my space. You know, I had a steady paycheck, a decent car, and enough in savings to feel like I had my act together. I thought I was checking all the right boxes. Then, boom, everything fell apart. Our CEO got tangled up in this huge financial scandal that shook the whole company. Next thing I knew, half of us were out the door, and I was one of the first to get the boot. No heads up, no nothing, just a severance check that barely covered 2 weeks of rent. At first, I wasn't freaking out. I had about 3 months of savings and a solid resume. I figured I'd land something new in no time. Oh, honey, was I wrong? The job market was a nightmare. Every posting I applied for had like 100 other people fighting for it. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and my bank account was just draining away. I cut out everything. Every streaming service, every little treat. It was down to the bare essentials, but even that wasn't enough when rent and bills came knocking. I knew I couldn't keep going like this, so I swallowed my pride and reached out to my family. I started with my dad. We've never been super close, but I thought maybe in a crisis he'd come through. I called, and I could hear a golf game blaring in the background. "Dad, I need some help," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I got laid off and—" Before I could even finish, he cut me off. "You should have saved better," he said, like it was that simple. "You can't just expect handouts every time life gets tough." Then he hung up. I just sat there, staring at my phone, totally stunned. I wasn't asking for a fortune, just a little help to cover rent until I got back on my feet. Next, I tried my mom. She answered in that sweetest pie voice she uses when she wants to sound caring but not actually do anything. "Oh, honey, you're in our prayers," she said. "But your dad just redid the kitchen, and we've got this cruise coming up. Maybe cut back on those lattes?" Girl, I hadn't touched a latte in months. Then there was my brother, Sean. The same Sean I'd bailed out with a $5,000 loan when he and his wife were struggling a few years back. A loan he never fully paid back, by the way. When I told him what was going on, he actually laughed. "Maybe if you hadn't blown your money on that city apartment and all those fancy work clothes, you'd have something saved," he said. "Some of us have real families to support. You're lucky it's just you." That one hit me hard. Not just because he was throwing shade, but because he made it sound like my life didn't even matter. Like, because I wasn't married with kids, I was somehow less important. Still, I pushed down my hurt and asked if we could all have dinner together. I thought maybe if they saw me in person, they'd get how bad things were. They agreed, but let me tell you, that night at my parents' house was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. My mom made her famous pot roast, acting like it was just another family get-together. My dad was sipping his scotch, barely looking at me. Sean and his wife, Carrie, showed up late, their kids running around like little tornadoes. I laid it all out. The layoff, the severance, the job hunt, the bills, the eviction notice that was just days away. I didn't cry or beg. I just asked for a small loan and promised to pay it back. Carrie rolled her eyes and said, "This is what happens when you don't plan ahead." Like she hadn't leaned on me before. My dad kept checking his watch. My mom suggested I try dating that accountant from my old job because a husband would make things easier. But it was Sean who really broke me. "We have real responsibilities," he said. "Real families. You only have to worry about yourself." The next morning, I got a text from him. "Don't contact us again until you've got your life together. We can't keep bailing you out." Bailing me out? They'd never helped me once. And now, when I needed them most, they just shut me out. I was completely on my own. And the worst part? I hadn't even hit rock bottom yet. A month later, I came home to an eviction notice slapped on my door. Big, bold red letters screaming, "Notice to vacate." I just stared at it, feeling sick to my stomach. I'd been scraping by, selling furniture, pawning jewelry, living off canned soup and dollar store crackers. But it wasn't enough. The rent was due, and I was out of time. That night, I packed what I could into my Toyota Corolla: a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop, a few photos, and the quilt my grandma made me when I graduated college. Everything else went into a storage unit, paid for with the last bit of credit I had. I sat in my car, staring out at the dark parking lot, wondering how my life had come to this. I'd worked hard, helped others, saved what I could, and now I was sleeping in my car. You learn fast how small your world gets when you're homeless. Your car becomes your everything: kitchen, bedroom, closet, bathroom. You figure out which grocery stores keep their lights on late, which fast food joints don't care if you linger, and which Walmart parking lots let you stay overnight without calling the cops. That first night, I parked behind a Walmart on the west side of town. It was quiet, with a few other cars around. People like me just trying to blend into the shadows. I curled up in the back seat with my jacket as a pillow. I hadn't cried when I got evicted or when I moved my stuff into storage, but that night, I sobbed so hard I could barely breathe. And still, nobody called. Nobody texted. My family, who used to brag about our strong family values in their Christmas letters, didn't even check if I was okay. For 2 weeks, I lived like a ghost. I kept my gym membership, not to work out, but for the showers. I'd wake up at 5:30, drive to the gym, clean up, put on whatever clean clothes I had, and head to the public library when it opened at 9. The library was my lifeline: free Wi-Fi, outlets, bathrooms. I applied to every job I could find: marketing, retail, admin, dog walking, babysitting, you name it. At least 15 applications a day. Lunch was a granola bar and a banana. Dinner was whatever was cheap. Clearance aisle finds or a $1 burger if I was lucky. One time I found an unopened sandwich on top of a trash bin. It was still sealed, still cold. I ate it. I told myself it was fine, but deep down I knew what I'd become. I was washing my underwear in public restroom sinks, counting change for gas, and pretending to hiring managers that I was calling from my home office, while whispering in a library corner with a dying phone battery. The shame was crushing. I didn't tell anyone what I was going through. I'd already been told my problems weren't real because I didn't have a husband or kids, no real responsibilities. But let me tell you, pain is pain. And I was drowning in it. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the fear or the exhaustion. It was the silence. Nobody came looking for me. Nobody wondered where I was. I realized that if I vanished completely, my family wouldn't notice until maybe Christmas, if even then. Everything changed on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was at the library, hunched over my laptop in my usual corner, cranking out my 18th job application of the day. My fingers were numb. My back was killing me from those hard chairs, and I hadn't eaten anything but a protein bar all day. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, expecting a librarian to tell me I'd overstayed my welcome. But it was Zoe Carter, someone I used to work with in recruiting. We weren't besties, but we'd always gotten along. She looked as polished as ever. Me? Not so much. My hair was in a messy bun, my blouse was wrinkled, and I probably had bags under my eyes for days. "Emma? Emma Blake, is that you?" she said, tilting her head like she wasn't quite sure. "Hey, Zoe," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." "How've you been?" she asked. I hesitated, then decided to be real. I've been better, looking for work. She sat down across from me, ignoring the librarian's side eye. Well, you're not the only one. After the company tanked, I started my own thing. A little recruiting consultancy. Just me and a couple others, nothing huge. But we've got some clients. Actually, she paused and smiled. We could really use someone like you. You were so good with hiring systems, team development, onboarding. I stared at her, wondering if I was dreaming. You're serious? I asked. Totally, she said. It's freelance, remote, project-based, and we can't pay much yet. But if it goes well, it could turn into something more. I almost burst into tears right there. Instead, I swallowed hard and said, yes. Please, I'll do anything. She handed me her business card, scribbled her number on the back, and told me to email her that night. When she left, I held that card like it was the key to my whole future. For the first time in months, I felt a tiny spark of hope. That night, I found a diner with free Wi-Fi and sent Zoe everything she asked for. Resume, samples, availability. She replied within an hour. Welcome aboard. My first project was building a remote onboarding toolkit for one of her clients. I dove in headfirst, working from my car with my laptop propped on a cardboard box. I charged my phone at the gym, my laptop at the library, sent drafts at midnight, and did calls from public parks. Zoe never asked about my situation, and I didn't bring it up. I just poured everything I had into the work, knowing this was my shot. 2 weeks later, she sent my first payment. It was only a few $100, but when it hit my account, I cried alone in my car in that Walmart parking lot. I wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was working again. And that meant everything. All right, that first payment from Zoe's project felt like a lifeline. It gave me just enough wiggle room to believe I could keep going. But let's be real. It wasn't enough to get me out of the hole. Not enough for an apartment, not enough to cover gas, food, and the storage unit where I'd stashed what was left of my old life. So I started hunting for a second job, something that paid cash, didn't dig too deep into my situation, and wouldn't care that I didn't have a real address. That's how I ended up at this 24-hour convenience store on the east side of town. The manager, Carl, was this gruff guy in his 50s who didn't even glance at my resume. He just looked me up and down and said, show up on time, don't steal, and don't sass the customers. That's all I need. I nodded and told him I'd be there. And I was. My days turned into this exhausting blur. I'd wake up at 6 in my car, drive to the gym to shower, then park myself at the library from 9 to 3, grinding out freelance projects for Zoe's clients. After that, I'd change in a gas station bathroom and work the graveyard shift at the store from 4 in the afternoon till midnight. I'd stumble back to my car around 1, crash for maybe 5 hours if I was lucky, and do it all over again. I was living off ramen, protein bars, and instant coffee made with hot water from gas station sinks. I had this little spreadsheet taped to my dashboard, tracking every penny I earned and spent, with my rent savings goal circled in red. Some nights I'd cry just from being so dang tired. Not because I was sad or scared, but because I was so worn out my vision would blur and my hands would shake while I counted change at the register. There were moments I didn't think I could keep going. Like the night I spilled coffee on my only clean work shirt and had to scrub it in a gas station sink, drying it under the hand dryer while praying I wouldn't be late. Or the time a customer chewed me out for taking too long to ring up a pack of gum, and I had to smile and say sorry while biting my cheek to keep from losing it. But I kept pushing through. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. It didn't look like much yet, but every project I finished for Zoe, every shift I powered through without quitting, every dollar I squirreled away in my emergency envelope, it all added up. Sure, it was a far cry from the girl who used to deck out her apartment for fall and host wine nights with friends. But it was also worlds away from the woman who slept with a car key clutched between her fingers for safety. One night, while I was restocking shelves at the store, I overheard this college kid whining about working 2 jobs just to pay for textbooks. I didn't say a word, but I smiled to myself. because I was juggling two jobs too, and maybe it didn't look like much to anyone else, but to me, it was the start of something better. About 3 months into this grind, Zoe called me out of nowhere. "I want to talk about something," she said. "Got a minute?" I was sitting in my car, chowing down on a microwaved burrito with the windows cracked. I wiped my hands on a napkin and said, "Sure." "You've been incredible, Emma," she said. "Seriously, you've done more in 3 months than some full-timers do in a year. I want to offer you something more permanent. Full-time hours, nothing fancy yet, but steady pay, and it's remote." For a second, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at my cracked windshield, her words bouncing around in my head. "Emma, you still there?" she asked. "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. "I'm here, and I'd love that." That job changed everything. With a steady paycheck, I finally scraped together enough to move into a tiny studio apartment. We're talking barely 400 square feet in a building where the hallway lights flickered and the neighbors yelled through the walls. But it had a door, a bed, a hot shower, and a kitchen with 2 burners that actually worked. It was mine. That first night sleeping on a real mattress instead of my car seat, it felt like I'd checked into a 5-star resort. My life started coming back together, piece by piece. Zoe's company was growing, and I threw myself into the work. I learned new platforms, took online courses at night, studied SEO, email automation, all that stuff. Every project was like a chance to prove myself. Zoe noticed. She started giving me bigger accounts, letting me run point on key clients. When she brought in a nonprofit focused on housing for women, she said, "I knew this one was for you." We never talked about my past, but somehow she just got it. One night, Zoe invited me to a local networking event. I almost bailed. I didn't have the right outfit, the right shoes, or the confidence. But she wasn't having it. "You've earned your seat at the table, Emma. Show up." So I did. I snagged a blazer from a thrift shop, paired it with my best jeans, and held my head high even though my hair was far from perfect. That's where I met Caleb. He was over by the bar, cracking up with someone about his failed tech startup from college. I wasn't looking to meet anyone, definitely not thinking about dating. But there was something about how he talked. Open, funny, real, that caught my ear. We got introduced through a mutual friend and ended up chatting the whole night. He didn't ask about my job until an hour in, and when I said I did digital strategy for a recruiting firm, he just nodded and said, "Nice. That's tough stuff. You must be sharp." It wasn't like he was surprised a woman had a career. He just respected me, like he really saw me. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I hesitated. It had been forever since I let anyone in. Too much had changed, and I'd built up some pretty thick walls, but something about his voice made me say yes. That coffee date turned into dinner, then another, then these slow, careful steps toward something I hadn't thought I'd want again. He never pushed me to talk about my family, or made snap judgments about my life. When I finally opened up about living in my car, he didn't bat an eye. "I've crashed on couches," he said. "4 of them in 1 year. No shame in surviving." For the first time in ages, I felt safe with someone. Not because he promised to fix my life, but because he didn't flinch at the messy parts. Let me tell you, the whole idea of buying a house started out as this little daydream I'd escape to when I was too exhausted to sleep, or when I'd drive past a quiet street and see those cozy porch lights glowing. I'd picture myself in one of those homes, with the kettle whistling away in the kitchen, books stacked neatly on a shelf, and this peaceful silence that was all mine. At first, it felt like a total pipe dream. I mean, I was just clawing my way out of financial ruin. But as my job with Zoe's company got steadier, as her business kept growing, and my paychecks became something I could count on, that dream started to feel like something I could actually reach. So I opened a savings account and called it Future. Didn't breathe a word about it to anyone, not even Caleb. It was my thing, you know? For the next year, I lived like I was still scraping by. I cooked every meal at home, walked instead of taking Ubers, clipped coupons like my grandma used to, and tracked every single dollar. Every extra cent went straight into that account. At first, the numbers crept up so slowly it was painful, but then they started picking up speed. And let me tell you, watching that balance grow felt like a win. Then one day, my landlord slapped a notice on everyone's door. Rent was going up again. I stood there, staring at that paper, and something just clicked. I was so done pouring my money into someone else's pocket, always wondering when the next rent hike would hit. I wanted something that was mine. So I started looking. Oh, honey, the process was a mess. I toured houses that smelled like they'd been sitting in a swamp, places with cracked foundations, neighborhoods where I wouldn't feel safe walking alone at night. I got outbid twice by people waving cash around like it was nothing. One time, I sat in my car and cried my eyes out after the perfect house slipped away just hours before I could get my offer in. But I didn't quit. I kept going. And then I found it. This cute little 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. The kitchen was straight out of the 80s, the paint colors were wild, and the front yard needed some serious TLC. But it had heart. Hardwood floors, a sturdy roof, and this sweet little porch that caught the morning sun just right. The second I walked in, I knew. This was my home. I put in an offer that night and wrote this heartfelt letter to the seller, spilling my guts about what this house meant to me, how far I'd come, how much I needed a place to truly belong. 2 days later, they said yes. The mortgage process? Total nail-biter. Every bank statement felt like they were putting my life under a microscope. I had to explain every gap in my income, make a case for why I wasn't the same risk I was 3 years ago. But I had the pay stubs, the tax returns, and a credit score I'd fought like hell to rebuild. And finally, they gave me the thumbs up. On closing day, I sat in this little office across from a notary, signing paper after paper. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the pen. When she slid the last document over and said, "Congratulations, the house is yours," I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. I nodded, said thank you, and held it together just long enough to get to my car. Then I completely lost it, sobbing in the parking lot. Not because I was sad, but because the girl who used to sleep in that same car had just bought herself a home. No cosigner, no family money, just me. That key in my hand felt like it weighed a ton, like proof I'd survived, rebuilt, and come out on top. Move-in day was everything. Caleb was there, hauling boxes like a pro. Zoe showed up with pizza and a bottle of cheap champagne. My best friend Tina, who'd split an apartment with me back when I could barely afford rent, brought cleaning supplies and this adorable little houseplant. We sat on the floor, eating, laughing, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and bubble wrap. I looked at them. Caleb, Zoe, Tina. These people who'd shown up for me, and it hit me. This wasn't just a house. It was a home. And these were my people, my real family. Sunday mornings became my favorite thing. I'd wake up without an alarm, brew a pot of coffee in my little kitchen, and take it out to the back deck. I'd sit there in my robe, wrapped in the soft morning light, listening to the birds, maybe flipping through a book or just soaking in the quiet. It was the life I'd built. No noise, no chaos, no guilt. Just peace. That Sunday, the air was crisp, but not too cold. I just poured my second cup and was curled up in my patio chair when the doorbell rang. I figured it was a delivery or maybe a neighbor dropping by. Then came the knock. Loud, insistent, kind of rude. I set my mug down, walked barefoot through the house, already annoyed at whoever was messing with my morning vibe. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I froze. There they were, my whole family. My dad, my mom, my brother Sean, his wife Carrie, and their kids, Owen and Mia. All of them, standing on my porch like they'd just stepped out of some old Christmas card, surrounded by suitcases, duffels, and backpacks. I just stood there, staring. "Surprise," my mom said, throwing her arms out like I was supposed to hug her on cue. I didn't move. She stepped forward anyway. Oh, honey, look at you, she said, tilting her head. You look tired. Are you eating enough? My dad didn't bother with the small talk. He was already peering into my house like he was appraising it for Zillow. Nice neighborhood, he said. Quiet, solid construction. Sean nudged his kids forward. Say hi to your Aunt Emma, he told them. You remember her, right? Owen gave a half smile and Mia just looked lost. Carrie was already snapping pictures on her phone. Such a charming little place, she said, dragging out the word little just enough to make it sting. I couldn't even speak. My brain was still trying to catch up. 3 years of nothing. No calls, no texts, no help when I was at my lowest. 3 years of them shutting me out, making me feel like I didn't matter. And now here they were on my porch with luggage, acting like none of it ever happened. As you can see, my mom went on, we've had quite a drive. It's a bit chilly out here. Mind if we come in? I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside, not because I wanted to, but because I needed a minute to wrap my head around this. My hands were cold, my jaw tight, my heart pounding. They walked in like they owned the place. My dad started wandering around the living room, tapping walls, checking window seals like he was on some home inspection show. My mom floated into the kitchen, loudly judging my cabinet colors. Carrie kept snapping photos. Sean's kids bolted upstairs before I could stop them. When I followed, I found them bouncing on my bed. Mommy says this is going to be our room, Mia said mid-jump. I get the big bed because I'm older, Owen added. I just blinked, stunned. Before I could say anything, I heard Owen yelling from my spare room, the one I'd turned into my office. This is my playroom. Books were already scattered on the floor. I herded them downstairs, gentle but firm, and found the adults sprawled out in my living room. My mom was lounging on the couch like she'd lived there her whole life. My dad had helped himself to my coffee pot. Sean was eyeing the framed certificate on my wall. Marketing, huh? He said. Always knew you'd stick with that. Paying the bills okay? It wasn't just small talk. It felt rehearsed, like they'd planned it. Why are you here? I finally asked. The words hit the room like a glass shattering on the floor. There was a pause before my mom answered, her smile way too big. Can't family visit family? She said. We've missed you, sweetie. When we saw you bought this lovely house, we just had to come see it for ourselves. I didn't say a thing. I just looked at the suitcases, their shoes by the door, the way Sean had already tossed his jacket over my chair. This wasn't a visit. It was an invasion. And deep down, I knew they weren't planning to leave. The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like the room was holding its breath. My family just sat there, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. My mom's mouth was still half open, her hand clutching her chest like she was in some soap opera. My dad's face was red, his jaw tight, like he was about to lecture me into submission. Sean was pacing now, muttering something under his breath, while Carrie shot him looks that said, do something. Owen and Mia were peeking in from the backyard, their juice boxes forgotten, sensing something big was going down. Caleb stayed close, his presence steady, like a quiet promise he had my back. Finally, my dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood. Emma, you're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and controlled. The way he used to talk when I was a kid and he thought he could scare me into agreeing with him. Family doesn't do this. You don't turn your back on your own blood. I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Family doesn't let family sleep in a car, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Family doesn't tell you your life doesn't matter because you don't have kids or a husband. Family doesn't show up after 3 years of silence with suitcases and a plan to take over your home. That's not family, Dad. That's something else. My mom started crying then. Big, dramatic tears that I knew were more about her image than actual hurt. How can you be so cruel? She said, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. We raised you better than this. We're in a tough spot, Emma. You have all this space. Why can't you just help us? I looked at her. really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel that old pull to make her happy, to smooth things over. I did ask for help, I said. 3 years ago, I called you, Mom. I told you I was drowning. You told me to cut back on lattes and pray harder. You didn't even ask if I was okay. So don't sit there and act like I'm the one being cruel. Sean stopped pacing and turned to me. His face twisted with something I couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, or embarrassment. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just need a place to crash for a bit. You're acting like we're some kind of criminals. A place to crash? I said, raising an eyebrow. Mia said you're moving in forever. Your kids are picking out bedrooms. Carrie's already rearranging my shelves. That's not crashing, Sean. That's settling in. And you didn't even ask. Carrie finally spoke up, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. Emma, honey, you're overreacting. The kids are just excited. We didn't mean to upset you. We thought you'd be happy to have family around. This house is so big for just one person. I turned to her, and something in me snapped. This house is mine, I said, my voice steady but firm. I earned it. Every single brick, every floorboard, every light bulb. I worked 2 jobs, lived in my car, ate dollar store food to get here. You don't get to waltz in and tell me it's too big for me. You don't get to decide what I do with my home. The room went quiet again. Even the kids had stopped whispering outside. My dad cleared his throat like he was about to try another angle, but I wasn't having it. No, I said before he could start. This conversation is over. You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. Tonight. My mom's tears turned into a full-on sob. You're heartless, she said, her voice breaking. After everything we've done for you, you're throwing us out like trash? I felt Caleb's hand brush my arm, just a small touch, enough to remind me I wasn't alone. You're not trash, I said, looking at each of them. But you're not my responsibility either. I've spent years rebuilding my life without you. I'm not going back to being the one who gives and gives while you take and take. Not anymore. Sean grabbed his jacket from the chair, his movements sharp, angry. Fine, he said. We'll go, but don't come crying to us when you're all alone in this big empty house and realize you've got no one. I didn't flinch. I'm not alone, I said, glancing at Caleb, thinking of Zoe, Tina, the people who'd shown up for me when my own family didn't. I've got exactly who I need. Carrie started gathering the kids' things, her face tight, like she was trying not to cry or scream. Owen and Mia looked confused, dragging their backpacks across the floor. My mom was still on the couch, sniffling, waiting for someone to comfort her. My dad just stood there, arms crossed like he was above it all. I walked back to the front door and held it open. There's a motel about 10 minutes from here, I said. It's clean, affordable, you can figure it out from there. One by one, they filed out, dragging their suitcases behind them. My mom gave me one last look, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Sean muttered something about me being selfish as he passed, but I let it roll off me. Carrie didn't say a word, just kept her head down. The kids waved, and I managed a small smile for them. They didn't deserve to be caught in this mess. My dad was the last to go. He paused in the doorway, looking back at me. You're gonna regret this, he said, his voice low. Family's all you've got in the end. I met his eyes. I've got me, I said, and that's enough. He shook his head and walked out. I closed the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet house. For a second, I just stood there, leaning against the door, my heart pounding. Then I felt Caleb's arms around me, pulling me into a hug. I buried my face in his chest, not crying, just breathing, letting the weight of it all settle. You okay? He asked, his voice soft. I nodded against him. Yeah, I said. I think I am. We walked back to the living room where the air still felt heavy with everything that had just happened. The couch cushions were messed up. There were juice stains on the hallway wall, and my mom's half-eaten pasta was still on the table. But it was my house, my space, and I'd fought for it. Caleb grabbed the bottle of wine he'd brought and 2 glasses from the kitchen. "Figured we could use this," he said, pouring us each a glass. We sat on the couch and I leaned into him, the warmth of his arm around me grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed. "I'm proud of you," he said after a sip. "That couldn't have been easy." I let out a small laugh. "Easy?" I thought I was going to pass out the whole time, but I couldn't let them take this from me. Not after everything. He nodded, his eyes soft. "You didn't just protect your house, Emma. You protected yourself. That's huge." I took a sip of wine, letting his words sink in. For so long, I'd carried this guilt, this feeling that I owed my family something, that I had to prove I was worthy of their love. But standing up to them, drawing that line, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own. We sat there for a while, talking, laughing, cleaning up the mess they'd left behind. By the time we went to bed, the house felt like mine again. The next morning, I woke up to my usual Sunday ritual: coffee on the deck, the quiet of early light. But this time, it felt different, stronger, like I'd claimed not just my home, but my life, all over again. And let me tell you, that felt better than any daydream ever could. The room went dead quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. My mom looked like I'd just slapped her across the face, her eyes wide and teary. My dad's mouth was set in this tight, angry line, like he was biting back a lecture. Sean was practically vibrating with rage, his fists balled up at his sides. Carrie just kept blinking, like her brain couldn't catch up with what I'd just said. Sean took a step toward me, his voice low and bitter. "You're really doing this, Emma?" he said. "After everything we've been through together?" I didn't back down. "Everything we've been through?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the years you all pretended I didn't exist? The months I was sleeping in my car while you were off playing perfect family without a second thought about me?" My mom snapped out of her daze, her voice sharp. "You're being cruel," she said. "We came here asking for help, not a lecture. This is what family does. We show up when it matters." I kept my voice steady, but every word was like a knife I'd been sharpening for years. "Exactly, Mom. Show up when it matters. I needed you and I had nothing. I called, I begged, and you all turned your backs. Now that I've got something, a home, a life, you think you can just waltz in and claim it? That's not family. That's just you looking out for yourselves." My dad stood up then, puffing himself up like he used to when I was a kid, and he thought he could intimidate me into line. "You think you're better than us now?" he said. "Because you've got this house, a job, some boyfriend with a big shot job?" I held his gaze, not blinking. "No, Dad, I don't think I'm better. I just know I'm free. And I'm not letting anyone pull me back into the guilt and silence I fought so hard to get out of." Carrie jumped in then, her voice shaky but trying to sound righteous. "What about the kids, Emma? They're so excited to be here. Do you really want to be the person who kicks out children?" That one stung, but only for a heartbeat. I looked her dead in the eyes. "I want to be the person who teaches them you can't treat people like garbage and expect them to welcome you with open arms later. That actions have consequences. That using kids to guilt someone is low." She didn't have a comeback for that. She just pressed her lips together and looked away. Outside, the porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow over their pile of suitcases still sitting by the door. They'd never planned on this being a quick visit. I could see it now, clear as day. "I'm giving you until tomorrow morning," I said, my voice firm. "You can stay tonight, but I expect this house empty by noon. If you're still here, I'm calling the police." Sean let out this dry, bitter laugh. "You wouldn't dare," he said, like he was calling my bluff. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but solid as a rock. "She would," he said, "and I'll be here to make sure it happens." Sean's face shifted. He looked at Caleb, then at me, then back at Caleb. Something in him broke. Maybe his pride, maybe the realization that I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. My mom sank back into the couch, like all the fight had drained out of her. My dad turned away, his jaw so tight I thought it might crack. They didn't say another word that night. The next morning, I woke up to silence. My heart was pounding as I crept downstairs, half expecting to find them still there, dug in like they owned the place, ready for another fight. But when I turned the corner into the living room, it was empty. Just the dents in the couch cushions where they'd sat, a folded blanket one of the kids had used, and a note on the kitchen counter in my mom's tight, perfect cursive. We didn't come here to fight. But I guess we've all changed. No apology. No owning up to anything. Just that. They were gone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Like I'd finally shed the weight of their expectations, their judgment, their absence. I stood in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, and took a deep breath. This was my home, my life, and I'd fought for every inch of it. The weeks after they left, I kept waiting for the guilt to hit. You know, that little voice in your head that sneaks up and whispers you were too harsh, too cold, maybe even too selfish. I braced myself for it, expecting that old, familiar pang to creep in. But you know what? It never came. Instead, I got silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind, but this peaceful, golden, wrap you up in a warm blanket kind of silence. I worked in my office without hearing kids thundering up the stairs. I cooked dinner and actually tasted it, no one hovering or complaining about my seasoning. I sat in my living room, curled up on my couch, without waiting for someone to criticize my throw pillows or roll their eyes at my choices. It wasn't just the quiet. It was this feeling of space. Like I could finally breathe, think, and just be without having to apologize for existing. Caleb started staying over more, not because I needed a bodyguard, but because he loved being in a home that felt so completely mine. We planted little pots of basil and rosemary on the kitchen windowsill, watched cheesy old movies on Friday nights, and laughed our heads off when we burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. One night, he looked at me over a steaming mug of tea and said, "You're different now, Emma. Stronger." I just smiled and said, "I'm finally me." I didn't reach out to my family, and they didn't call me either. For the first time in forever, I wasn't the one chasing after them, begging to be seen or handing out forgiveness before anyone even asked for it. I let the silence do the talking, and what it said was so clear. I matter. My boundaries matter. My peace matters. So, listen. If you're out there and you've ever felt guilty for putting yourself first, hear me out. You're not wrong for protecting your peace. You're not selfish for saying no. And you're definitely not cruel for walking away from people who only show up when they need something. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, effort, showing up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. If you're carrying the weight of other people's choices, let it go. You don't have to burn yourself out to keep anyone else warm. You deserve a life where your kindness isn't mistaken for weakness, where love doesn't come with a price tag of silence. And if that means walking alone for a bit, hold your head high. Healing's not easy, but it's worth every single step. And so are you. It was one of those raw, chilly autumn days where the sky felt like it was pressing down on you, and the air smelled like rain and leaves that had already given up. I just swung by the post office to grab a package. Nothing fancy, just a new phone charger. And as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, something stopped me dead in my tracks. There she was. She was sitting on this beat-up metal bench by the bus stop, hugging a faded backpack like it was her lifeline. Her hair plastered to her forehead from the drizzle. Her clothes soaked and clinging to her like they were as defeated as she looked. Her head was down, but for a split second, her eyes flicked up as I passed by, and that one look hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew that look. Not just the hunger or the bone-deep exhaustion, but that empty stare of someone who'd run out of places to feel safe. I kept walking at first. My brain was screaming that this wasn't my problem, that people end up on the streets for all sorts of reasons, and I couldn't fix them all. I had my cozy house now, my responsibilities, my boundaries, all those things my therapist kept reminding me to protect. But then I stopped, right there in the middle of the sidewalk. Because 3 years ago, that was me. Alone, freezing, invisible, sitting in the front seat of my rusty old car outside a grocery store, trying to choke down stale crackers without drowning in my own shame. So I turned around. I didn't have a clue what I was doing or what I'd even say. But I knew I couldn't just leave her there, not after the world had left me to fend for myself. "Hey," I said softly, walking up to her. "You doing okay?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with these wide, wary eyes, gripping her backpack like it was the only thing in the world that hadn't turned on her. "I'm not trying to hassle you," I said, "but there's a little cafe just around the corner. If you want a hot coffee or a place to warm up for a bit, it's on me." There was a long pause and then, so faint I almost missed it, she nodded. And that's how it started. Not with some big, heroic moment or a life-changing miracle. Just a rainy day, a scared girl, and someone who'd been right where she was, choosing to stop and stay instead of walking away. The cafe was practically deserted, just a handful of people tucked into booths, sipping their coffees and keeping their eyes to themselves. I chose a table by the window, far enough from everyone else to give her some breathing room. She sat down real slow, her fingers shaking just a bit as she wrapped them around the warm mug of tea I'd gotten for her. "Take your time," I said, keeping my voice soft. She didn't say a word for what felt like forever, just stared into that mug like she was trying to find something she'd lost. I didn't push her. I knew better. When someone's been through hell, you don't rush them into spilling their heart out. You wait. You listen. You let the quiet do its work. "My name's Emma," I said after a bit, gentle as I could. "What's yours?" She hesitated, then finally looked up. "Lena," she whispered, her voice so faint it was like saying her own name scared her. I didn't pry. I just nodded and let the silence settle back in. We sat there for a good 20 minutes, me sipping my coffee, her holding on to that tea like it was an anchor. I could see her eyes flickering around the cafe, sizing me up, wondering if I was for real or if this was some kind of setup. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke. "My mom told me I made it up." I looked at her, careful not to say anything, just letting her know I was listening. "He was her boyfriend," she went on, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'd crash at our place a lot. Sometimes I'd wake up and he'd be in my room, just sitting there, staring at me." She stopped, her grip tightening on the mug. I told her. I told her everything. She yelled at me, said I was lying, that I was just looking for attention, that I was trying to wreck her life. I felt a knot in my throat, but I stayed quiet. "I grabbed a bag and left that night," she said. "Thought maybe she'd come looking for me. She never did." I nodded, slow and steady, letting her words sit there, fragile as glass. I knew if I jumped in too fast with words of comfort, it might break whatever trust she was starting to build. "She changed the locks," Lena added, her eyes still glued to the tea, "just to make sure I couldn't come back." It was like looking at a younger version of myself. Different story, same kind of hurt. The same sting of being betrayed by the one person who was supposed to keep you safe. Finally, I spoke. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, my voice soft but sure. She flinched like those words were foreign to her. "You know that, right?" I said. "None of that was your fault." She gave a small nod, but I could tell it hadn't sunk in yet. That kind of truth takes time to settle. What she didn't know was that I'd already made up my mind right there in that cafe. Not out of pity or some need to play hero, but because I'd been where she was, left out in the cold by the world. And I'd sworn to myself that if I ever saw someone else caught in that same storm, I wouldn't just keep walking. Lena didn't realize it yet, but she'd just met someone who wasn't about to let her drown. The rain had finally let up by the time we left the cafe, but the air still had that chilly bite, like it was holding on to some kind of grudge. I walked Lena to my car without saying much, and she kept her backpack clutched tight to her chest, like it was her only shield against the world. When we pulled into my driveway, she turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "Thanks for the tea," she said, "and the ride. I'll be okay from here." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes were clearer now, but there was still this shadow of fear flickering behind them, like she was always waiting for the next person to walk away. "You can stay the night," I said. "I've got a spare room with clean sheets and a hot shower. No strings attached, but it's there if you want it." She stared at me like I'd just offered her the moon. She didn't answer right away, and I got it. When you've been through what she had, you don't just jump at offers. You're too used to them coming with a catch. "Just one night," she finally whispered. "One night," I said, nodding. She crashed hard that night, like her body had been waiting for a safe place to shut down. I didn't hear a peep from her room, and when I checked on her the next morning, the bed was made so neat it looked untouched. The room was spotless, and her backpack was already slung over her shoulder. I found her in the kitchen, folding a dish towel after drying a plate. "You don't have to do that," I said, walking over. She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "You let me stay. It's the least I can do." I gently took the towel from her hands. "Lena," I said, "you don't owe me a thing. Not one single thing. And you don't have to rush out of here just yet." That's when I saw her walls start to crumble. She tried so hard to keep it together, but the tears came anyway, quiet and steady. The kind that spill out when you've given up on hope and then someone hands it back to you, still warm. "No one's ever," she choked out, her voice breaking. "No one's ever let me stay." I didn't wrap her in a hug or reach out. I just stood there with her, letting her have that moment, letting her cry in a kitchen that finally felt like a safe place. What I didn't tell her right then was that I'd already made up my mind. This wasn't just about one night. She could stay until she was ready to stand on her own 2 feet. And if nobody else in her life had ever shown her what a real home looked like, I was going to. Even if I had to build it from the ground up. At first, it was the small stuff that caught my eye. Lena started leaving her bedroom door open just a smidge at night. She'd pitch in with the dishes without me saying a word. She even scribbled her name on the grocery list for shampoo and toothpaste, using them so sparingly you'd think she was still rationing to survive. I never pried. But every few days, she'd let a tiny piece of her story slip out. Not in some big, dramatic tell-all, just quiet little bits, like she was testing the waters to see if it was safe to share. One morning, she wandered into the kitchen wearing one of my old, oversized sweaters. "I used to have one like this," she said, pouring herself a bowl of cereal, "before I got kicked out." I smiled and handed her a spoon. "Looks better on you," I said. We started taking evening walks together. At first, she'd keep her hoodie pulled up, eyes glued to the sidewalk. But one day, I said something silly, and she laughed. Really laughed, this bright, surprising sound that almost slipped past me. She blinked, like she was just as shocked as I was. "You've got a great laugh," I said. "I didn't even know I still had one," she replied, her voice soft. That moment stuck with me, because healing doesn't come with a big announcement. It doesn't roll in with confetti and a brass band. It sneaks in through the little things, a shared laugh, a cozy sweater, sleeping through the night without waking up scared. But something else started happening, something I didn't see coming. By helping Lena feel safe, I started to see how far I'd come myself. All those therapy sessions, the journals I filled, the nights I had to talk myself into believing I deserved my own home. It wasn't just surviving. I was living, really living. Watching Lena take her first shaky steps toward that same kind of life reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. You don't have to be completely whole to lift someone else up. Sometimes it's in reaching out to others that your own healing really kicks in. Lena didn't need me to fix her. She just needed someone who wouldn't walk away. And somehow, By showing up for her day after day, I was learning to keep showing up for myself, too. It was early spring when I started noticing a shift. The snow had melted away, and the air felt softer, like the world was taking a deep breath. Lena had stopped clutching her shoes like she might need to bolt at any second, leaving them by the front door instead. And one night, I heard her humming in the kitchen. Humming like she'd forgotten she was supposed to be afraid. I came downstairs and found her cooking dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti with way too much garlic and a shy little smile, but she'd set the table. 2 plates, 2 napkins, even a couple of candles flickering between us. "What's the occasion?" I asked, grinning. She shrugged, stirring the pot. "Just felt like cooking tonight." But I knew what it really meant. It meant she was putting down roots. That night, as we sat across from each other, giggling over the slightly chewy pasta and how she'd forgotten to add salt, she said something that hit me right in the heart. "This is the first place that's ever felt like home," she said, her voice soft, like she wasn't sure she had the right to say it out loud. I didn't answer right away. I just looked around the room, at the couch where her blanket was folded just so, the bookshelf where her favorite books were tucked in next to mine, the fridge covered with her little sketches and sticky notes. And it hit me. This wasn't just her home. It was ours. "I'm glad," I said finally, "because you belong here." She blinked, gave a small nod, and went back to her pasta, but I could tell those words had settled somewhere deep inside her. Later that night, as I passed by her room on my way to bed, I saw something that made my throat catch. On her desk was a note, not meant for anyone, just written in her wobbly handwriting. "I'm not afraid to unpack anymore." It was such a simple little sentence. But for someone like Lena, it was everything. It wasn't about unpacking clothes or bags. It was about trust. She wasn't bracing for the door to slam shut behind her. She wasn't keeping one foot out, ready to run. She'd chosen to stay. And in doing that, she reminded me of something so true. Healing doesn't always come from being pulled out of the dark. Sometimes it's about finding a place safe enough to stop running. The months slipped by, and Lena started to bloom. She signed up for a GED program and stuck with it. She picked up her sketchbook again, drawing late into the night in the living room with soft music humming in the background. She made friends, real ones, not the kind who wanted to fix her or swoop in like some kind of savior, but people who just liked her for who she was turning into. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at nothing at all, and I'd smile too. I knew what it was like to have nothing and no one, so watching her learn to feel at home in her own skin felt like something holy. We didn't talk much about that first day anymore, the one where I found her on that rainy sidewalk. We didn't need to. It was like this quiet thread woven between us, a reminder of how shattered things used to be and how far we'd come since then. One night, we were folding laundry in the living room, just chatting about nothing important, when she looked up from a towel and said, "I used to think people like you weren't real." I stopped folding and looked at her, waiting for her to go on. "But now I get it," she said. "Maybe I just wasn't the kind of person who could meet someone like you back then." Her words caught me off guard, and I blinked, trying to take them in. "I wasn't ready to be loved before," she said, her voice steady. "Not really, but I'm learning how to let people in now, because of you." I walked over and sat next to her on the couch. "No, Lena," I said softly, "because of you. You chose to stay. You built this life. I just kept the door open." We sat there for a long time after that, not saying much. But it wasn't the heavy silence we'd shared in that cafe all those months ago. This was the kind of quiet that feels like home. That night, right before bed, she knocked on my door. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for not walking away." And in that moment, it hit me. Simple and deep. Lena wasn't just some lost girl I'd taken in. She'd become my family. Not the kind you're born into, not the kind tied by blood or shared names, but the kind you build, piece by piece, trust by trust, until it's strong enough to hold two people who once thought they weren't worthy of love. So if you're ever wondering if opening your heart to someone who's hurting can really change anything, let me tell you, it can. Because sometimes when you help someone else find their way, you end up finding a piece of yourself too.